Jomon Era, Deep Dive Series, Episode 1. The Jomon people possessed all the wisdom necessary to build civilization. In this episode, we'll uncover astonishing truths about Japan's Jomon period, an era that witnessed the world's first round-trip sea voyages, the earliest invention of pottery, and peaceful settlements of over 10,000 people that lasted for more than 10,000 years. But doesn't that sound different from what we learned in school? When you think of the Jomon period, what comes to mind? Maybe something primitive, like cavemen lagging behind other civilizations? That's the image many of us were taught. Even though the Jomon period spanned over 10,000 years, it gets about the same textbook space as the Yayoi period, which only lasted 600 years. That's just weird, right? And as if that weren't enough, there was actually a time when the entire Jomon period was removed from elementary school textbooks in Japan. Between the year 2000 and 2010, due to a change in educational guidelines from 1998, both the Jomon and Paleolithic periods were completely erased from the 6th grade curriculum. Public backlash followed. 10 years later, the concept of the Jomon period was finally reinstated, but only in a limited way. In fact, in 2014, the Japanese Archaeological Association officially issued a statement urging the government to improve how the Jomon era is taught. But the real question is, why? Why would such a long, peaceful, and advanced period of history be considered? And there's more. The mystery doesn't end with education policy. There's an actual NPO called the International Jomon Culture Association that aims to share Jomon culture with the world. Its honorary president? Emily Rothschild, daughter of Jacob Rothschild, the current head of one of the most powerful financial families on Earth. Why would a member of the Rothschild family be involved in promoting Japan's ancient Jomon culture? Is there something hidden? Something too important to be overlooked? Could the Jomon period hold secrets that shake the foundations of our understanding of history itself? To unravel this mystery, we may need to go even further back, not just to the origins of humanity, but beyond. In today's world, where historical truths are being rewritten, it's time we re-examine the Jomon era with fresh eyes, origins of humanity and the Jomon mystery. To truly unravel the mystery of the Jomon period, we must go far beyond the origins of Japanese civilization. In fact, we need to go beyond the origins of humanity itself. Let's take a journey back in time, way back. Modern humans, as we know them, are classified as Homo sapiens. We're said to be the only surviving species in our genus. But before Homo sapiens appeared, there were several stages of human evolution: ape men, primitive humans, archaic humans, and finally modern humans. The earliest known ancestor in the human lineage is called Sahelanthropus chidensis. Though there's debate about the exact timeline, it's believed to have lived in Africa around 7 million years ago. That's ancient. What made this early hominin different from apes was its ability to walk upright, freeing up its hands. That, in turn, allowed it to use simple stone tools and start hunting. Interestingly, fossils from this time have only been found in Africa, and for about 5 million years, these hominins didn't leave the continent. Then came the primitive humans, who emerged around 2 million years ago. This group finally began migrating out of Africa, spreading to various parts of the world. You've probably heard of Java Man and Peking Man. Both are examples of these early humans. Even at this stage, they were using basic tools, controlling fire, and it's believed they even had simple language. They were far more capable than we often give them credit for. This phase lasted around 1.5 million years. Eventually, about 500,000 years ago, the archaic humans appeared. They continued migrating, reaching Europe and West Asia, and evolving even further. One of the most well-known archaic humans is the Neanderthal. And contrary to old stereotypes, Neanderthals were highly advanced. They made sophisticated stone tools, used fire, wore clothes similar to cloaks or ponchos, and even practiced herbal medicine. They had large brains and lived in structured communities. It's clear, they weren't just brutish cavemen. They were intelligent, adaptable, and resourceful. And then came the modern humans, Homo sapiens. They appeared in Africa around 300,000 years ago and gradually spread across the world. At this point, humanity began to evolve rapidly. We started developing complex language, practicing agriculture and animal husbandry, building shelters, and creating art, religion, and even medicine. But here's where it gets intriguing. While mainstream history tells us civilization began just a few thousand years ago, new archaeological discoveries, like Göbekli Tepe or Jomon-era sites in Japan, suggest otherwise. Could it be that human civilizations existed far earlier than we thought? These ancient remains challenge the conventional timeline, hinting that we may only know a fraction of our true history. Archaeologist Curtis Runnels from Boston University discovered stone axes on the Greek island of Crete, dating back over 100,000 years. This suggests that Neanderthals might have used boats to reach the island, which has been isolated by vast seas for about 5 million years. The presence of these tools implies that Neanderthals had developed seafaring capabilities. Runnels believes that many people crossed the sea to Crete over 100,000 years ago, establishing long-term settlements. This indicates intentional voyages rather than accidental drift. If true, it means that either Neanderthals or Homo sapiens from Africa undertook these journeys, which is quite astonishing. In Asia, fossils of Denisovans, a group that diverged from Neanderthals around 300,000 years ago, have been found. Denisovans interbred with Homo sapiens, who later succeeded in major sea voyages to regions like Sundaland and Australia. This raises the possibility that Denisovans possessed advanced maritime skills, which they might have passed on to Homo sapiens. Genetic studies reveal that Homo sapiens remained in Africa for about 140,000 years, before suddenly spreading across the globe around 60,000 years ago. At that time, Neanderthals and Denisovans still inhabited various regions. Evidence shows that Homo sapiens interbred with these archaic humans, with Neanderthal genes prevalent in Europeans and Denisovan genes in Southeast Asians. Modern Japanese people carry genetic markers from both groups. Approximately 47,000 years ago, Homo sapiens achieved a one-way sea voyage to the Australian continent, covering about 80 kilometers from Sundaland to Sahul. This journey is considered intentional rather than accidental drift. The descendants of these seafarers, such as Micronesians and Polynesians, developed traditional navigation techniques like star navigation, allowing them to traverse vast oceans without maps or instruments. The concept of constellations dates back to ancient civilizations like the Sumerians. Even the Göbekli Tepe site, dating back 12,000 years, shows evidence of early astronomical understanding. This suggests that knowledge of stars and sea currents existed long before previously thought. Regarding the migration to the Japanese archipelago, there are 3 proposed routes. Hokkaido route, 25,000 years ago. Migrants entered from Sakhalin into Hokkaido. Okinawa route, 30,000 years ago. Migrants traveled northward via the Philippines and Taiwan to Okinawa. Tsushima route, 38,000 years ago. The earliest migrants crossed from the Korean peninsula through Tsushima to Kyushu. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were 120–130 meters lower, but straits like Tsugaru and Shimabara remained deep, necessitating sea travel to reach Japan.
So, it turns out that ancient humans couldn't reach the Japanese archipelago without some form of seafaring. Many people assume that Japan was once connected to the mainland by land bridges, but by the time Homo sapiens arrived, roughly 38,000 to 25,000 years ago, that simply wasn't the case. During the last glacial period, the climate was cold but stable, and sea levels were still high enough to separate Japan from the continent. In other words, they had to cross the sea. Now, here's where it gets mind-blowing. A research team led by Professor Nobuyuki Ikeya from Meiji University found that 22 out of 25 obsidian tools excavated from the Demaruyama site in Numazu, Shizuoka, originated from Kozushima, an island far out in the Izu archipelago. And the radiocarbon dating of the associated charred material? It dates back to 38,000 years ago. This means people were repeatedly traveling back and forth between the mainland and the Izu Islands to trade obsidian. In other words, humans were not just crossing the sea, they were engaged in round-trip seafaring and trade nearly 40,000 years ago. That's way earlier than any known maritime activity elsewhere in the world. Most other regions didn't develop real seafaring until about 9,000 years ago. Japan, 38,000 years ago. It suggests that Homo sapiens may have reached the Japanese archipelago far earlier than we currently realize. And there's more. Japan is home to some of the oldest pottery in the world. In Aomori Prefecture, fragments of Jomon pottery dating back to 16,500 years ago were found, predating Mesopotamia and even the 20,000-year-old pottery discovered in China's Jiangnan region. Why is this important? Because pottery represents a revolutionary shift in human history. It required people to process clay, shape it, and fire it, essentially applying chemical transformation to materials. More importantly, large pottery is heavy and fragile. Once you make it, you're unlikely to move. That means settlement. In essence, pottery marks the end of nomadic hunter-gatherer life and the beginning of permanent human settlements. This is what we call the Neolithic Revolution. And Japan? The Jomon people were already using highly refined, polished stone tools, thousands of years before other civilizations. So why didn't cities like those in Mesopotamia or Egypt emerge in Japan? That's the next big question. Why did the Jomon people reject agriculture? The spiritual worldview of a nature-loving people. Why did the Jomon people not embrace rice farming? To answer this question, we must explore not only Japan's natural environment, but also the worldview the Jomon people lived by. For over 10,000 years, during the Jomon period, no agricultural revolution took place in the Japanese archipelago. While other civilizations across Eurasia built cities and developed social hierarchies through farming, the Jomon people deliberately chose a different path. One reason lies in the richness of the Japanese environment. Surrounded by the sea, blessed with mountains, rivers, and forests, the Jomon people had access to abundant natural resources throughout the 4 seasons. Through fishing, hunting, and gathering, they were able to sustain themselves. Labor was minimal, food was stable and varied. There was no pressing need to create rice paddies. Around 7,300 years ago, a cataclysm struck, the eruption of the Kikai caldera. This massive volcanic explosion devastated much of southern Japan and may have significantly delayed the northward spread of agriculture. But beyond environment or disaster, the core reason may lie in their spirituality: animism. The Jomon people believed that gods and spirits resided in everything: the mountains, wind, fire, rivers, stones, and even food. They expressed gratitude to these spirits, living in harmony with them. Farming, which involved controlling and reshaping the land, may have been seen as a form of sacrilege, an act of dominance over nature and the divine. Eventually, with the Yayoi period came rice cultivation and iron tools from the continent. Society shifted, settlements grew, population increased, and ideas of ownership and class emerged. The Jomon lifestyle, rooted in spiritual freedom and coexistence with nature, began to fade. The Jomon didn't reject farming out of ignorance. They simply didn't need it. To them, true abundance meant living in harmony with the rhythms of the earth. Even today, their worldview echoes in Japanese culture. The mountain gods, the forest spirits, the 8 million kami. This ancient animistic wisdom still speaks to us, reminding us what it truly means to live with nature. In a time of climate crisis and uncertainty, perhaps the Jomon way of life offers us not just a story of the past, but a guide for the future.